we're going to talk about psychotherapeutic approaches to addiction treatment in Chapter 8. What we know is that the clinician's or the counselor's attitude has a huge impact on whether or not a client will accept or implement new therapeutic approaches. So how you present treatment approaches affects your client's ability to accept it. If you only present one approach, so if you myopically focus on one approach as being the be-all, end-all for addiction treatment, that's what your client's going to hear, and that's what your client is going to hang on to. As you can see here in the slide, no one tried and true approach has been known to work for everyone. And so the best way to sort of talk about this is if we frame this in the context of AA or 12-step. We're going to have a whole chapter on AA and 12-step treatment approaches, but if we just kind of look at it in this chapter, that's the most widely used treatment approach. And unfortunately, the data on how effective that treatment approach is it's pretty bleak. Yet this is what we focus on as being the model for treating addiction. You know that ethically we are bound by this code that says that we need to present all options to our clients, that we need to have our clients be as informed about their own treatment choices, and we don't impose our treatment approach on them. And so if you think about this as we go on through these therapeutic approaches, think about how you are going to sit with your client and present all options and support your client's choices depending upon what that option might be, even if it conflicts with your idea or your view. Okay. Your book talks about informed eclecticism, and you know this because you should know this through your theories class. So your theories class talks about integrated approaches. And what this model says is that, there's no one approach for everyone, and that you're to do exactly what we just discussed. Include a variety of effective approaches and present those to your clients so that they can make effective choices. There is this movement, I want everyone to sort of hear this and understand this. There is a movement away from the idea that addiction is a disease. That's how we've known it. Addiction is a disease. Addiction is a disease. You have a disease. We're moving away from that idea and moving more toward this multifaceted approach or multifaceted view that addiction is complex and is not just this single, cannot be viewed through this single disease model. That there are so many different ways of looking at it. And if we look at it just myopically through this disease model, then we miss and ignore or even dismiss other equally valid approaches. We dismiss and ignore and avoid the idea that addiction can be seen as a result of trauma. You guys all watched Gabor Mate's video, and that's exactly what he says. This is, for the record, how I view addiction. I view addiction as a response to upsets or missteps or traumas that an individual experiences at various developmental levels, and that addiction is a means of coping or a means of dealing or a means of not dealing with these upsets, these discomforts, these traumas. All right, I'm going to not go into all this, but I want you to click on that SAMHSA link. Actually, I included a link. Don't use that link, but I included a link in Canvas that is a database of empirically supported treatment approaches. Make sure you look into that, and you can narrow that search. If you click on that link through SAMHSA, you can narrow that search if you're looking at working with teenagers, if you're looking at working with transgender population. There are treatment options that you can focus on that apply to different populations and different demographics. This chapter is kind of heavy, so you're going to definitely need to read up on it. I'm going to touch on a few approaches that they talk about. We'll specifically just kind of start with cognitive behavioral. This is also commonly used therapeutic approach. So this is one that is obviously evidence-based, and it usually goes alongside relying on AA and 12 steps. So treatment centers integrate AA and 12-step treatment options and cognitive behavioral practices. So if you work in an inpatient facility, if you work in outpatient, if you or maybe even private practice clinicians will integrate the two, AA practices or 12-step practices and cognitive behavioral practices. And these are behavioral approaches. They touch on things like self-control. They touch on things like behavior management. They touch on things like social skills training and coping mechanisms, and a lot of it is to teach coping skills, to teach ways of modifying behavior, to teach ways of thinking in a different way that changes the way you feel. So that connection between thinking and feeling. Again, you guys should all be familiar with CBT at this point. And it's pretty common practice. As you can see here, things that I just went over, looks at addiction as largely learned, and that it is something that can be modified. To a certain respect, this is true, that some of the behaviors or some of the habits around those behaviors can be changed. But what cognitive behavior misses is that focused on those past traumas. And really going in depth into learning about that aspect that is interconnected with addiction. I want to jump to read up on these mindfulness. Mindfulness is definitely something that's making its way into addiction treatment. Mindfulness-based relapse prevention. This is a way of promoting awareness, increased awareness into being present, being focused, being in the here and now, and breaking some of those habitual patterns that go hand in hand with use. So that automatic, I get up, my sole focus, my sole relationship is around use. And again, make no mistake, when an individual is using, when an individual has an addictive use disorder, they are in a relationship with that substance or that behavior. And our hope and our focus when an individual desires change is that we change the relationship that they have with use. It's not just to say you need to take away the substances. It's that you need to change the relationship with that substance or that behavior. You need to change the relationship that that person has with what that substance or that behavior does for them. It's not just a matter of taking it away. It's a matter of changing that relationship. And so mindfulness-based approaches integrate that self-reflective or insightful way of digging into how to change that relationship. I hope that makes sense. It moves away from just sort of automatically behaving, that habitual pattern that we know that is so prevalent with use. Brief interventions. So if we look at some brief interventions, which oftentimes if you're working in a treatment center, you may be using brief interventions just because the nature of managed care dictates that you deliver treatment services quickly. So this is common. Read up on what brief interventions are and sort of the way that these can be delivered. We talked in early on in the chapter about professional issues in addiction treatment, how other professionals and paraprofessionals may deliver some treatment. And this is pretty common with brief interventions. So utilizing paraprofessionals or peer support professionals is going to be common with brief intervention. Solution focused. Again, this is not long-term treatment, but solution-focused focuses on the client's abilities, their achievements, their strengths, and the resources that the clients have within themselves. This is positive. Solution-focused is a great theory and a great way of looking at working in addiction treatment. And you can see that solution-focused and maybe motivational interviewing, that chapter that preceded this chapter, may go hand in hand, especially as we look at developing a therapeutic relationship and that therapeutic alliance with our clients. It is counseling from a hopes perspective. This is very much strengths-based, and that it's not punitive. This may include treatment centers or inpatient or outpatient treatment programs that do not penalize clients for relapse. So it would not be uncommon in some treatment centers to kick clients out of treatment if they relapsed. In an approach like this, they would use the relapse or the lapse as an opportunity for growth, as opposed to being punitive. Keep reading up on solution focused. I want to lastly, finally touch on harm reduction. Harm reduction oftentimes can be kind of a nasty word, if you will, in addiction treatment, particularly if a treatment center or a treatment approach is more traditional in that AA abstinence 12-step world. Harm reduction is not seen as usually a very helpful option. Interestingly, the United States, and sort of this Western way of looking at addiction treatment, we're kind of the only ones that view treatment this dogmatically. We have this myopic focus on abstinence, 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 and not other countries or parts of the world view it this way. They more lend themselves to harm reduction and moderation. And so harm reduction and moderation approaches look at minimizing or limiting or cutting back use as opposed to quitting altogether. Now, what's important about harm reduction and moderation is that there may be times, depending upon the individual's severity of use and depending upon what the client is using, that they stop using altogether at first and then ease into maybe moderation. So it may be really, really, really important if somebody is really heavy into their use that they go through detox, and if they choose after some time of sobriety to attempt to, let's say, drink again, that they do so slowly and they do so with moderation. And then the opposite can happen where if someone is using, then they cut back and they cut back and they cut back to a way of using that is a bit more healthy and changes the relationship that they have with that substance. Another example, let me just stop real quick before I go into another example. Harm reduction approaches and moderation approaches, the goal, as you can see at the bottom of this PowerPoint, is staying alive. And maintaining health and getting better. The goal is not quitting use. The goal is just doing a bit better than what you did previously. And again, that can just be just reducing harm. And that reduction in harm is not just to the individual, but as you can see here, also to society. So that's a great segue into some routes or some approaches can be needle exchange programs, a warm turkey approach. So a warm turkey approach is the opposite of cold turkey. That's that cutting back or tapering down, limiting intake. And again, if you are acting ethically and if you are using an informed eclecticism approach, then you are presenting all of these options to your client, and your client is choosing what is best for them. You are not choosing what is best for them. So if your client says, hey, I really just want to cut back in my drinking, and you say, no, abstinence is the only way, whose goal or whose way of treatment are we looking at? Are we looking at ours, or are we looking at our clients? I want you guys to reflect on that, and I think you've got an assignment around that as well. All right, that's it for this chapter.